Welcome to this lecture on if-else construct. Now, lot of cases you have to do some execution of statements based on certain conditions. So every programming language provides a feature where conditionally statements can be executed. If-else condition is represented as a Boolean expression. Else is used to execute a code when if condition fails. At the end of this video, you should be able to understand if-else construct, discuss the best practices while using if-else construct, understand how to execute multiple if-else conditions. Let's begin with the motivation. Execute code based on certain conditions. For example, you're trying to look into a file and see if I can process that file. But what if the file doesn't exist? So you check the condition. If the file exists, do your work, else tell the user that the file doesn't exist. A condition is always represented as a Boolean expression. In language like C and C++, I could simply say if x, do something, where x can be 0 or non-zero. Whereas in Java, x has to be Boolean, or you can say if x less than 10, x greater than 10, and then you perform your operations. Let's look at a syntax. The if condition has a very simple syntax. If, in bracket, mention the condition, and then the statement followed by that. Now, if you have multiple statements to execute based on a condition, you surround them with a curly bracket. Having said that, it's always a good practice to use curly brackets. For example, if you want to check number is even or odd, we can use this if condition. So we have a variable num assigned with some value, and we want to see if number is divisible by 2. So if the number is divisible by 2, then it's an even, so that becomes our condition. So we say if num modulus 2 equals to 0, we print even. But what if it's an odd number? The condition fails, the block is not executed, and there is no output in this. So effectively, we are only checking for one single path. Also observe the bracket that I've used for num %2. Now that's optional. It's just to increase the clarity. Otherwise, you can simply type if open bracket num modulus 2 equals to 0 close bracket. Now sometimes when the condition fails, for example when the number was odd, nothing to do. So we have an alternate. We can use the construct called else to represent a block of statement that need to be executed when the condition fails. So this use of else is optional. Only one else per if construct. So you can't really say if one condition, else do this, else do this, else do this. You can't do that because for a given Boolean expression, there is either a true or a false. So when it's false, so you do the else part. Now else must be immediately given after an if. You can't have something in between if block and an else block. Now let's take the same example once again, but this time we also want to see if the number is odd, then we want to do something too. So we check the number for divisibility by 2, and if it's divisible, remainder is 0, we print even. However, when the condition fails, we go to the else block and print that that number is an odd. So the best practice to do that is always use a curly bracket. Now this not only enhances the readability but also maintainability. For example, over a period of time, if somebody else is modifying your code, they insert a code assuming that that would work for an if condition, your else will give you a problem. Now improves readability as well as maintenance. Now these are some of the things that you shouldn't be doing. Can you guess what not to be done here? Now you don't use in this fashion because there's no curly bracket. Now tomorrow if somebody adds a statement in the else, assuming that it's going to be part of the else, so as you can see the message, it says when the condition fails, you go to the else block, print the system.out.println odd, and along with that you say, hey, this is not divisible by 0. As you can observe, no matter what happens with the condition, the last line is always printed, which is wrong, at least logically wrong. Now, there is also something that you shouldn't be doing like this. Now, this definitely is a problem because compiler would say, hey, else is misplaced. And that's because if num modulus 2 is 0, print that is even. And that's it. The if condition is over. The system.out.println divisible by 0 altogether becomes a new statement. And else is having a no if construct at all. So this is a compiler error. So compiler won't even allow you to go forward. Now, this is another thing that you should avoid, writing everything in the same line, and this is also a very bad practice. Now, technically there is nothing wrong with this, but readability and maintainability, both of them are at problem. Now, there is also a requirement of executing multiple conditions, but they're all related. So if you have more than one alternate for a condition or multiple conditions, multiple executions based on each condition, you go with this. You use an if, else if, and continue to do until you have nothing else to do. So you just say else. Now, else here also is optional. So as an example, let's see, find the number of days in a given month. Now, assuming that February has 28 days, meaning we're not considering leap year here. Now, we say if month is equals to 2, the days is 28. But what if it's not 2? There are so many alternates. If month is not 2, it could be 4, it could be 7. So now we check that in the next condition. So which means else if month equals to 4, month equals to 6, month equals to 9, 11. Now we're only checking if it's not February. So it can be one of these April, June, now September and November. Now what if that is also not true? Then we go to the else and we say, hey, it's none of the February, April, June, September and November. So it has to be one of the rest of the month where 31 days exist. So now some of the best practice to find from here is that avoid unnecessary if or else. For example, the last example we took, we had an else block. Now I took it away because I assigned 31 by default to days. So if none of the condition match, 31 remains be stored in the days. So here is another thing that you can avoid. Now sometimes you would like to nest if constructs. So what is the meaning of nesting? You have if condition inside another if condition. So days is 31. So that we are using because we want to avoid the else part. But this time we also want to take leap year in mind. So we are thinking that if month is 2, we assign days as 28. But remember, there is a possibility of a leap year. So now we check if the year is leap. Now days is 29. What if it's not leap? Nothing happens, days is already 28. Because month is February and it's not a leap year, days remain 28. Now this way you can nest for multiple conditions. Now certain things also can be avoided. For example, I have a function here called isLeap. It takes an argument of year and checks if the year is leap or not. Now note the return value which is true or false. So we check the condition, and if the condition is true, we are returning true, and if the condition is false, we are returning false. Now how can I avoid this? We put the condition itself as a return statement, because earlier also we were doing the same thing. If the condition was true, we were returning true, and if the condition was false, we were returning false. Same here too. So wherever possible, avoid the use of if-else because it's an added process to the processor. So let's summarize quickly as what are the things that we learned. Now we saw that the use of else construct is to execute when an if condition fails, and always use curly brackets as best practices. Avoid unnecessary if or else.